They're both veteran politicians who experienced insurrection after unseating incumbents. Joe Biden, President of the United States, to host Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, Brazil's president, at the White House. The sit-down with the left-wing counterpart to the U.S. president, expected to focus on trade, the environment, and, of course, that recent storming of Brasilia, Brazil's capital, by supporters of Lula's predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro, who is now in Florida. Well, for more, let's go to Washington. She worked on Latin America at the State Department and at the Wilson Center. Anya Prusa is Senior Director for the Americas at the Albright Stonebridge Group, a political and business consultancy. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thanks for having me.
How like-minded are these two characters?
Well, I think, when you look at their policies, there's a lot of areas of convergence, right? They both believe that climate change and the environment are critical to driving economic growth and securing the future of their countries. And so certainly there's going to be a lot of discussion of how Brazil and the United States can collaborate together on that front. They're also interested in expanding trade opportunities and supporting a reduction in inequality and a reduction in poverty at home. And so in terms of their approach, there are a lot of areas where the two can discuss. And I think on a personal level, we're going to see President Biden and President Lula get along really well together. They're both men of the people, so to speak. They both believe in the importance of a personal relationship. They're both very warm, very charismatic when they're in a room. And so I think we'll see, in addition to the policy convergences, that there's also space for a good personal relationship.
Yeah, and they're also of the same generation. What are they, 2 years apart in age? But let me ask you, Anya, is it uncomfortable, the fact that Lula's predecessor is right now in Florida?
Well, it certainly doesn't help. I think what we'll see is that President Biden and President Lula are very much going to focus on the bilateral relationship. They're not going to touch on the fact that former President Bolsonaro is currently in Florida. The former president has applied for a tourist visa, reportedly, to stay in the United States. And my understanding, having spoken with several people, is that Brazil sees this as a domestic issue that the United States is going to have to make a decision on. They don't want to be seen as interfering in that process. But obviously it's uncomfortable, I think, for both Biden and Lula to have Bolsonaro in Florida.
There is also a second aspect to this. I mean, Jair Bolsonaro was a huge fan of Donald Trump. The ties run very deep between Bolsonaro, his son, and the family of Trump. Of all the other world leaders, it's the former Brazilian president who's closest, you could say, to Trump.
I think that that's a fair assessment to make, right? Bolsonaro really saw a model in Trump that he could emulate in Brazil, and he very much appreciated former President Trump's political style as well. After Biden won the election, we saw that Bolsonaro really delayed in acknowledging the results. During the campaign, he came out publicly in favor of former President Trump. And so when, Biden won, when he was inaugurated and he's suddenly in office, it certainly created tensions in the relationship between the United States and Brazil, because you had in Brazil a president who had not supported Biden's candidacy. That said, it's a very different scenario right now, now that President Lula is in office. And I think a lot of those tensions, in some ways, will create even more desire on part of the United States and Brazil to restore that relationship and really have a warm, collaborative dialogue going forward.
Let's look at the optics for domestically where you are in the United States, because there isn't one Hispanic community when it comes to Latin American politics. There are several. And Lula's from the left. How strong will be the blowback from more conservative Hispanics?
Well, I think one thing it's really important to note is how Brazil sees itself in the world, right? Brazil is not Hispanic. So it is, Latino, if you will. It is part of Latin America. But I think Brazil would be very resistant to kind of being just lumped in, right, with the rest of Latin America. It is one of the largest countries in the world in terms of population, geography, the economy. And so
but you will agree that Lula is portrayed as close to all the left-wing leaders of Latin America right now.
Right? I mean, Lula is from the Workers' Party. He has a long history of being part of the left. He has certainly sought to renew ties with leftist leaders once he took office. And so that is very much true. I think what we've seen, right, is that Democrats in Congress have been much more interested in proactively reaching out to Lula. There will be much more skepticism on the right in the United States. Whether that's going to have an actual impact on Brazil-U.S. relations remains to be seen. And I think there's a lot of areas for convergence.
It comes at a time when, since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, there appears to have been a bid by Washington to court that part of the world much more. We're seeing a beginning of a thaw in relations with Venezuela. And just this week, political prisoners freed in Nicaragua and coming to the United States. What's going on exactly?
Well, I think the geopolitical landscape is shifting, right? And this is accelerated by what has happened in Ukraine, but this was a trend that was already starting to occur. And certainly the United States sees the value of closer relationships with the rest of Latin America. It is a region that has substantial natural resources, energy, agriculture. This is important to, the future of electric vehicles and supply chains and food security, to say nothing of the impact on climate change. So there's a real strategic interest there. That said, Latin America is also a region that has, close ties to China, where Russia has made inroads in recent years as well. And so I think there is a desire on the part of the United States to ensure that its interests are also being heard, and to ensure that it can maintain the connections in the region.
Many thanks, Anya Prusa, for being with us, Director of the Americas for the Albright Stonebridge Group, for joining us from Washington.
My pleasure.